All right, so I want to make a video real quick because obviously I know we have a lot of clients here that are on GLP-1 medications. When I say GLP-1 in this particular instance, I mean all the classifications of drug there, whether it's semaglutide, tirzepatide, or retatrutide. But from here on out, I'm going to be specifically saying retatrutide, semaglutide, right? Because there's some conversation that we want to have around that semaglutide specifically as it relates to this topic. So I think the biggest thing that I want to address here is the reality that obviously we had the phase 2 trials drop recently here, and I've seen a lot of garbage on Instagram specifically, or on social media in general, I'm sure, about people kind of getting behind the reality of like, see, I told you retatrutide causes muscle loss. So I want to talk about two things: muscle loss specifically, right, and the realities behind that, and then weight regain was another big one. Okay, so a couple different things there. Like, first and foremost, let's start with the lean mass loss, and I want to make sure that we understand that what a lot of people I'm seeing reporting, they're getting confused with the reality of lean mass loss, right, that we see reported within the research. And I have the research literally lined up right here. I have a whole bunch of different research here, okay, a couple different things that I want to go over. But the fact of the matter is, these people are getting lost in the reality that lean mass includes, and this is per the paper we have here for the retatrutide, right? Lean mass includes muscle, water, bone, and organs, not just muscle tissue, right? So when we see lean mass, we have to understand that what that's considered is fat-free mass. So anything that's not fat, they're including in this concept of lean mass, right? So glycogen being a huge factor there, right? Water being a huge factor there, right? So we have to understand that these things are part of, every weight loss experience, regardless of how we get there and what tools we use to get there, okay? So more on that, though. But the bottom line is, and digressing back to the point here, is that lean mass loss and muscle mass are two different things. Okay, two different things. So we're looking at research, and they're talking lean mass. We have to understand that's not proteins. That's not actual tissues that we're looking at from a muscle tissue perspective. Okay, so that's first and foremost, because there are a lot of people that are promoting that. Okay, and now secondarily, right? Actually, you know what? Let me stop here, right? So we have that understood. And I want to make sure, because again, what I'm seeing a lot on Instagram are people getting confused between the lean mass and muscle mass. And they're getting behind this, and they're championing the concept of, see, I was right. I told you that you were going to lose your muscle mass, blah, 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 blah. There's two things, right, that you have to be considerate of when you're seeing, this kind of information on Instagram right now. Stupidity and content is king, okay? There are a lot of people, when they're being aggressive like that and they're talking like, I told you, I knew that, they're stupid. That's the bottom line. They're stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. You need to stop following that person, because you're getting misinformed, and it's going to start to fuck with the way that you think, right? And honestly, if they're that misinformed, if they don't know that and they're talking about, like, then at the end of the day, you really shouldn't be getting any information from a person that doesn't recognize that. None. It's unbeneficial. Stop following that person. Right? But then secondarily, content is king. So I've seen a lot of people that are talking about, like, oh, if you don't want to lose muscle tissue during your retatrutide usage or your GLP-1 usage, then, click here and get this, free thing, right? They're using it to generate content. Right? We have to understand that content online is simply content. It's designed to engage you. It's designed to get the engagement. It's designed to make you click on this. It's designed to make you get their free thing. It's designed to make you, reach out to them so that they can book you for a consultation and sell you something. Like, that's what it's designed for, realistically. Okay. So now, we have that under control, right? Lean mass, okay, is not muscle tissue. Anybody that says it is stupid, okay? Or they're trying to generate content. Now, secondarily, when it comes to lean mass loss, right, with weight loss, those two things are mutually inclusive. We cannot separate those, right? It's like people just found out that when you lose weight, you lose lean mass. That's fucking consistent with every single report that we have, or paper that we have, or all the research that we have. When you lose weight, you are going to lose lean mass, okay? Period, plain, sweet, and simple, done, stop, okay? We have a lot of bodybuilders with us. We've been in the bodybuilding community for years and years and years, and one thing that we've always done and we've always known is that, hey, when you get aggressive within fat loss, you have the potential to lose muscle mass, right? So we want to do things to protect against the loss of muscle mass, right? Specifically things like weight training, right? things like eating enough protein, these things are always part of the process. So specifically, again, in some cases, just to reduce the risk of lean mass loss, right? So like at the end of the day, I don't understand where people come up with this concept now that because we see lean mass loss as it relates to the weight loss with Retatrutide, that now all of a sudden we're blaming Retatrutide or looking at Retatrutide or looking at a GLP-1 saying, wow, this GLP-1 is bad for muscle tissue. Well, calorie deficits are bad. How many times have one of you guys said, hey, I want to diet? And I'm telling you, like, well, we're probably not going to build very much muscle tissue in a deficit. If anything, everything that we're doing in a deficit is trying to maintain our muscle tissue as best we can, right? Or how many times have we talked about muscle tissue getting flat when we diet, right? Like there's literally a saying within bodybuilding where you got to get flat to lose fat. You got to get flat to lose fat. And when we talk about getting flat, we're talking about reducing muscle glycogen stores, right? And that makes that muscle look a lot smaller, a lot less full, a lot less round, right? But it's a necessary part of losing body fat, right? Because that's also an energy. If we want the body to go find energy or go create energy, right, from fat storage, we need to get rid of this energy that sits over here, right? That energy that sits over here is part of lean mass when we're looking at it on research. Okay, so weight loss in general creates lean mass loss. And when we look at the research that we have here, so I have a couple of different reviews that I have pulled up, but this is a systemic review, right? So it's a large group of information that we're taking, right? What we have here is based off of what they're calling a very low calorie deficit, okay? VLCD, and this is... let me see where we have the information here. All right, so this systemic review and meta-analysis showed that interventions restricting daily energy intake to 900 calories or less caused significant reductions in muscle mass, not lean mass, muscle mass, in both individuals with type 2 diabetes and those without type 2 diabetes. Expectedly, significant reductions in body weight occurred, and our results demonstrated that approximately 25.5% to 27.5% of total weight loss was accountable to muscle mass among individuals with and without type 2 diabetes, respectively, right? So 25.5% to 27.5% of total weight loss, right, with no pharmacological intervention in terms of things that are going to specifically be for weight loss, right? In this particular thing, those were excluded, right? Now, what we have from the Retatrutide, okay, Retatrutide results. People lost 24% of their total body mass, right, which is insane, okay? Fat mass reduction, right, was 74% of the total weight loss. Lean mass reduction, so not muscle mass like we were talking about on the other one, which is far more concerning, and that was just with a crazy calorie deficit, okay? Lean mass reduction, right, is 26% of the total weight loss when it came to Retatrutide. Okay, so people on average lost 52.9 pounds total. 39.2 pounds of that was fat mass, right? 13.7 pounds was lean mass, which again, lean mass is not muscle mass, right? The other paper that we're looking at was muscle mass, okay? So where are we getting this idea that Retatrutide, and this was at a 12 milligram dosage per week. This is at 12 milligram dose per week for 48 weeks. All right. So where are we getting this idea that Retatrutide is somehow worse for lean mass than even just dieting on its own, right? Really aggressively. All right. So that's a big thing that I think that we need to make sure that we are really understanding when it comes to Retatrutide. Because at the end of the day, I think that there's even, when it comes to the glucagon component of Retatrutide, we're probably looking at something that's going to help preserve more muscle tissue, right? Relative to just being in a crazy calorie deficit, okay? Now, I want to make sure, right, that we also just touch on real quick that the thing, and I know I already said this a little bit, but the things that we could do for everybody, right? Because we have people that are on things like TRT, that are on more than just TRT, right? These things are going to be entirely protective of muscle tissue. We shouldn't be worried about losing muscle tissue with those things being involved at all, right? But then even beyond that, resistance training and adequate protein intake are going to be things that we could use to be able to maintain a level of protein synthesis that is going to help us protect our muscle tissue during dieting and or the use of a GLP-1. Okay, bottom line. All right. And I think lastly within this conversation is the fact that we have to understand that when it comes to these drugs, what we're looking at as a primary mechanism, especially when it comes to some of the previous research that we have, which I did have one pulled up. I don't know what I did with it. When it comes to the research that we have on the semaglutide, I think semaglutide was up to like 40% lean mass loss. I'd have to find that and bring it back up, but it was a much higher amount because the reality is semaglutide is much more of an appetite suppressant. So what we see when we're talking about these groups of people, right, where they're essentially in these trials for more particular purposes than what you're using these compounds for. You're using these compounds to be able to generate better outcomes of the diet that you're using, right, that has adequate levels of protein with your resistance training program that you're doing, right? And you're already conscious about your the total macros that you're consuming, your diet as a whole, lifestyle considerations, whereas these people are just obese, overweight, right? And probably given very little. We could legitimately look into exactly what they're given from a support perspective as it relates to their diet, etc. But the reality is they're not working with a coach that's working with them week in and week out like you guys are, right? So at the end of the day, where was my point going here? My point here is, so when these things are extremely suppressive of somebody's appetite, and some of these people are reporting eating 700 calories a day, 800 calories a day, 900 calories a day, that's obviously not you, right? Common anecdotal reports, most users report strong hunger reduction even at lower dosages, right? So we're looking at significantly reduced appetite. Think about the way some of you ate before you came to me, or think about the way that you know people that are close to you eat, right? Where they might wake up first thing in the morning and they're having like an English muffin and a cup of coffee, right? With some butter on their English. That's meal one. Meal two is like a salad that they got from somewhere at work, and maybe they got a little bit of chicken on it. But we all know that little bit of chicken is probably like 3 ounces of chicken. Right. And then when they get home for dinner, they're having, maybe something else that's a little bit more protein laden, that's a little bit more beneficial for it, a little bit more filling or whatever it is. Or maybe, honestly, it's just some shit that they got on the way home. Right. Which is how a lot of people end up coming to us in the first place. Right. So they're not eating a very protein rich diet to begin with. Now, you give that same person a drug that suppresses their appetite. Now they're skipping the English muffin in the morning. Right? Maybe they're only eating half the salad that they're having. And instead of stopping at a drive-through on the way home, which is great, they're going home and they're having whatever it is that looks appetizing to them at that time. The one thing that I'll tell you about the high dosages of the GLP-1s is that I think that there is a very consistent, and I don't know this for a fact, right? Because I've never been pregnant, but working with women that are going through their first trimester, and obviously, having 3 kids myself and being there with my significant other, the one thing I would say is like, there's a very real aversion to food that you see people have in most cases there. And I would say it's very consistent sometimes with what we see with the GLP-1s, where it's just this low grade nausea all day, right? So when it comes to what they actually are eating, it's more so things, right, that are appetizing to them at that time. Right? It's appetizing to them at that time. So it's something simplistic. It's something easy. Sometimes it's things that aren't even necessarily good for them. Right? But again, they're getting away with eating that and still losing weight because it might be the only thing that they're eating on that day of any type of true caloric substance. Right? So, at the end of the day, I want to see if I can find what their diet was like within the research. But, at the end of the day, the point here remains that we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration the fact that some of these people are, their diet is not, even if they're working out, their diet is not conducive at all to losing, to maintaining muscle mass. And it is more conducive to losing muscle mass. And whether they were on that retatrutide or that tirzepatide or that semaglutide or not, these people are still at risk of losing muscle tissue within such a deficit because their diet's just not lined up appropriately to be able to sustain anything, right? And again, you guys all know the people that I'm talking about that are significantly under eating protein on a day-to-day basis, or even significantly under eating. That diet that I came up with there was pretty consistent with the way that you might see a lot of adults eat nowadays. And the problem ultimately becomes for them is that meal that they're eating at night that they're on the way home, it obviously inflates their entire day from an overall caloric standpoint. But if you're stopping at a drive-through on the way home, or you're ordering pasta from this restaurant, or you're ordering another salad from this place because you think it's going to be healthy, and the fact of the matter is it's higher in fat calories than it is anything else, right? That's the standard American diet, and the way that you have to envision these people are eating is a very high percentage of their calories coming from fat, a very moderate percentage of their calories coming from carbohydrates, and a very low percentage of their calories coming from protein. That's the standard American diet, okay? So if that's the way people are eating and they're simply suppressing their appetite on that style of eating, there's obviously not going to be a very healthy outcome there as it relates to lean mass preservation. And I would also argue that's the problem with a lot of the side effects that we see on these compounds, right? Is that people are simply under eating to such a degree that yes, it helps them lose weight, but unfortunately, right, there's going to be a whole other host of health issues that come from under consuming to such an extent, and including things like the osteopenia that we see, or the bone mineral loss, including things like some of the thyroidal issues that we see from these things, right? Like we're not fueling the body well enough anymore to sustain, all these, we'll call them physiological functions or lean mass preservation. There's got to be a certain level of inclusion of food to have, just a healthy metabolism or healthy metabolic function. Right? We can't just completely and totally dismiss the idea of eating enough food over and over and over again, and then take a drug that makes us content with that and think that everything's going to be okay. All right. The only other thing I want to point out about lean mass loss too is that I want you guys to remember that in most cases, we don't have a lot of long-term research, okay, on significant calorie deficits, right, for long periods of time with individuals. Right, so we have a lot of information on calorie deficits, right? A lot of data on calorie deficits and people being in calorie deficits for relatively short times, right? 8 weeks, 12 weeks, maybe 30 weeks, right? But at the end of the day, long-term research like we're getting with these Retatrutide trials, right? Or the GLP-1s in general, the whole host of them. We're talking about this particular one being, I think it was 48 weeks, I said, right? 48 weeks. 48 weeks. So we don't have, so when we're looking at, the weight loss that we're seeing over such a long period of time, right, there probably is going to be a little bit of a higher percentage of lean mass loss in some cases. That's probably likely. And again, we'd have the information available, right, if we had this really long-term research on just calorie deficits to show that it probably be as bad, if not worse, honestly, especially as it relates to Retatrutide, which looks like there could be some protective mechanism there as far as glucagon is concerned, in terms of the lean mass. So again, lean mass loss might even be worse when we have these really extended bouts. But again, we don't have that. That would be considered like unethical from like a research perspective. Like we'd probably have to go back to like the Minnesota starvation diets before there was, before we were held to certain ethics as it relates to the research that we have. So now we have that. Now, same exact conversation comes about when we're talking about weight regain, okay? Now, I spent my entire screen on tabs for so I don't have any, information directly in front of me here on this. I did take a couple of notes before I did this, but I think we'll just roll with this in the sense that what I want people to understand about weight regain is that this is something that you and I have probably talked about this a million times if we've talked about weight loss and then ultimately maintaining it afterwards, right? Weight regain is something that, again, is part of every single person's process when it comes to losing weight. And it's the biggest issue that we have as far as weight loss is concerned in America, right? The issue isn't the ability to be able to lose weight. Right? Americans report losing weight by the dozens upon dozens of pounds every single year. Unfortunately, we see the same exact people regaining those weight within the next calendar year. Right? So we're looking at GLP-1, right? And taking into consideration everything we just said about lean mass loss, right? Think about the people that we're talking about here. Think about the most general person that you know and their eating habits, that person waking up, having an English muffin and a coffee, having lunch with a little bit of chicken on their salad, and then getting something out of a drive-through or something from Uber Eats, on their way home, from work at night, right? So that same exact person, right? When they don't change any of that, And that is what led them to the point to want to take Retatrutide, right? Or semaglutide or tirzepatide. They take these appetite suppression compounds, right? That significantly reduces that food that they're eating on a regular basis, prevents them from eating like a fat pig all weekend to jack up their calories even higher on the week. And yes, they are going to lose weight, especially on these compounds that are extremely effective for fat loss, extremely effective for fat loss, right? They're going to lose weight. But what happens is as they pull that compound out, right, their hunger goes right back to where it was. And it's almost like this new realization. So if you've ever dieted with any success, and you guys can all comment on this, right? If you've ever dieted with any success, when you get to the tail end of that diet, how fucking hungry are you? Right? What we got to understand is that when we're losing fat, right, there are two primary considerations here. There are other things that we can get deeper into, but the easiest way to be able to talk about this is just simply talking about ghrelin and leptin. Okay, leptin is secreted from fat cells and it keeps us satiated. It's a hormone that signals the brain that essentially tells us to be comfortable from the food that we just ate. You're good. You don't need anything else. Right? That's excreted from fat cells. So as fat cells shrink when we're dieting and losing fat, right, we produce less and less of that leptin, so you have nothing there to regulate, right, and you get unsatiable. So like that means you have a meal and 15 minutes later you're like, fuck, dude, I could eat a whole. You're not even worried about eating McDonald's or pizza or anything like that. For any of you that have been truly lean, you know that you would kill just to have another one of those chicken and rice meals. Right? All you want is, instead of 6 ounces of chicken, I want 8 ounces of chicken. I want 250 grams of white rice. Like I would kill for that. And then even if you did eat that much food, right, you'd still be hungry, 45 minutes later. You'd be starving. Right? It would give you very temporary fulfillment. All right, because again, you're low in that leptin, you don't have a lot of satiety, and ultimately that makes you hungry even after you're consuming. Okay, but then on the other side of that is ghrelin, which is essentially released from where again these are all feedback loops, right? So we're getting this feedback loop, this ghrelin, and ultimately it's that feeling, those hunger pangs that you're getting, right? Those are ghrelin. So we're not putting anything in the stomach, right? And when it's not getting stretched out, we're getting this ghrelin signaling, right? That's going to the brain and telling us, eat, dummy, eat. You haven't eaten anything. I'm empty. Eat something, right? So we, on one side of the spectrum, because we've reduced food so much in terms of the calorie deficit, right? We have less food going in our system. So we have more ghrelin. But then on top of that, because we're losing fat, because of less food in the system, now we have less leptin. So we're hungrier in between meals as well. All right. So now when it becomes time to say, okay, we're not dieting anymore, a lot of people immediately lose their shit. And they go out to eat. They're like, well, now I'm not dieting. I can go out to eat. And you eat 2,000 calories in one sitting and you gain 6 pounds right there. Again, we can bring this back to the bodybuilding world. And not just the bodybuilding world. I've also talked to all of you guys about the reality of reverse dieting. When we lose weight, right, it's like, hey, if we set you up for a 14-week dieting phase, it's not just 14 weeks. We need a solid 4 to 6 weeks after that to rebuild a certain level of homeostasis, to rebuild a certain level of pro-adaptive responses or pro-adaptations over that time, to be able to get these things a little bit more regulated. And the way that we do that is slowly increase food, right? And you have to, that's why it's called reverse dieting, where simply we want to stay on the diets, but we want to reverse the food back up so that you can be a little bit more content in terms of the volume of food that you're consuming, okay? And now over time, we'll get better adaptations there. We'll also put a small amount of additional fat back on, right? Which again allows us some level of homeostasis here, allows us some level of pro-adaptive response, some level of leptin coming back and ghrelin being satiated, etc. Okay, so now, but again, we've always talked about the reality of how important the reverse diet is for these reasons. Okay, now again, take into consideration the typical user right now or the general population person that has no coach, right? No structured eating habits. They're taking these compounds, right? Because their doctor gives it to them. They buy them from one of our websites. Or they're going to, Rise or Merrick Health or whatever. Everybody, they're going to fucking Weight Watchers, right? It doesn't matter, right? But nobody's actually telling them, hey, when you come off of this, you really need a structured concept in play, like a reverse diet, to be able to get you back to some sense of normality before you just pull this out, right? So now you have these people that are struggling over the course of 4 to 6 weeks post removal of that compound with their appetite slowly but surely coming back to a place where they're fucking ravenous, right? So now that person that was eating an English muffin in the morning, a salad in the midday, and some, fast food on the way home, or they're probably doubling their caloric intake from where they were prior to them getting started just because of the environment that they're in, right? So we've actually seen this in some of the research too, where we could see even like fat cell proliferation, even though that's rare, but it's possible, right? Where we eat so much post-diet that we literally don't have enough place to store it. So fat cells have to proliferate, and one fat cell turns into two fat cells. Again, a rare thing to happen, but something that could happen nonetheless in extreme cases, right? And again, when you want to talk about extreme cases, look no further than bodybuilding. People that suppress themselves for so long, and then there's literally reports every single year during the bodybuilding season, people gain 15 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds in a weekend, right? We've literally seen dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people that have crazy edema, right? Post-show because they have so much water that's in their ankle or in like crazy places just from the amount of overconsumption they have in such a short period of time. This is real. It happens. Why we would think it wouldn't happen after being on an appetite-suppressing drug for a year, right, is mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing to me. You just lost 50 pounds over the course of a year, right? And now you're going to come off of that and think that you're not going to have a significant impact because you didn't address your lifestyle. You didn't address the food that you're consuming, the habits that you have. You just took a drug, suppressed everything, and lost weight over the course of the next 48 weeks. No bueno. Right? Most of us aren't going to have to deal with that to an extent. I would say when you pull things like Retatrutide out because of the level of diuresis that has and urethresis it has, right? Like we're going to see some level of weight regain no matter what in most cases, right? But it could be very minimal relative to some of the numbers that they're reporting. So again, same concept exists for muscle tissue prevention or muscle tissue loss around dieting, as does weight regain in the sense where we have to understand that you are in a situation no matter what, right? Where these things are realistically plausible and most likely to happen when we're not in a structured program. You are most likely to lose lean mass when you diet. You are most likely to regain your weight post a successful diet, especially when you're not in structured programs, right? Regardless of pharmacological intervention. Okay? But again, I want to make a final point here in the sense that the other side of these GLP-1s, Retatrutide, I guess, tirzepatide, most specifically for us, we rarely use the semaglutide, is the reality of dose. We have to understand that there's also significant implications when it comes to dosing these products.